Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read-Along. We have a great show planned for today, a lot of important topics to discuss. We're going to cover the Rittenhouse verdict. We're going to talk about the 1619 Project books that came out this week. We're going to talk about critical race theory. If you have questions, hold on to them. We have two experts who can talk about it. We're also, if we have time, we'll talk about the infrastructure bill and what it means for Black communities around the country. Our guests are Karsonya Whitehead. She's a PhD, an Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker and award-winning radio host, director of the Karson Institute for Race, Peace, and Social Justice. Walter Greason is also a PhD. He's an interdisciplinary scholar, historian, urbanist, and economist. He's the professor and chair at the Department of History at Macalester College in Minnesota. Thank you for waking up early, Walter. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and guest host of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read-Along. We're also live on both Walter and Kaye's Twitter accounts. So if you're joining us from there, thank you very much. We are live every Sunday with the New York Times Read-Along. We review the Sunday New York Times, bring in special guests, talk about important topics of the day. Nothing could be more important this week than the topics we'll be covering: the Rittenhouse verdict, 1619 Project, the infrastructure bill, and the ongoing debates about critical race theory. Let us know where you're watching from and put it in the comments. We'll be able to show it on screen. It is absolutely a pleasure to have you here today. Walter was actually a guest about almost 2 years ago now, I think, for the MLK edition back in January 2020. One of the first times we started using this platform called StreamYard. So Walter, thank you for that. We have a number of people who are watching. Our first guest, Ted Coltman, joining us from Washington, D.C. Ted, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us. Diane Stefani, joining from Margate, New Jersey. Thank you, Diane. Always appreciate your support. And we love the guests that you've been able to bring us. So please keep doing that. We have Lynn Stern joining us from Baltimore. That's Kaye's neck of the woods, so I'm going to ask her later whether she knows Lynn. Of course, Carla Baranakis is joining us, one of our producers. Everything is legal in New Jersey, as she likes to say. Patricia Freudenberg. Thank you, Patricia, one of our loyal watchers watching from New York, and wishing everyone a happy Thanksgiving week. Lisa Borden is joining from Atlanta. Lisa, thank you so much. Always good. Always good to have folks join us from Atlanta. Miriam Berkeley from Hell's Kitchen. Thank you, Miriam. Sujana Chandrasekhar is joining us as well. Dr. Chandrasekhar is one of the hosts of She's on Call, which airs at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll certainly talk about that. We'll mention that toward the end of the show. And Joan Detz is here as well. Thank you, Joan, for joining us. As I mentioned earlier, I am the executive producer and guest host of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read-Along. I'm stepping in this week to host what is going to be a fascinating discussion with Kaye Whitehead and Walter Greason. But first, let me just give a shout out to our team that produces the Sunday New York Times Read-Along every week. We have Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. Whether it's booking guests, whether it's watching on Facebook and putting in links to articles, adding context, etc., this is how we think you should produce a show. And we do it all through our firm, Digimentors. Sri is the co-founder. I'm the vice president of events and communications. We do social and digital consulting, conferences, webinars. We produce shows like this. If you're interested in having us produce a show like this, feel free to email us. You can reach Sri at digimentors.group. You can also reach me, Neil, at digimentors.group. We'd love to talk to you. A lot of our clients are going into, moving from virtual events into hybrid events. and we have a ton of experience putting together a hybrid event. Pro tip on that, it's the sound that matters more than anything else. Getting the right sound is always tricky. So let us know if you want help producing an event. We'd love to work with you. We also want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Muckrack. Muckrack does incredible work. Sri has worked with them to produce training sessions on social media. They do great work in terms of their journalist database. So thank you, Muckrack, for your support of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. If you're interested in being a sponsor, please let us know. We'd love to talk with you. We have a few more people that have joined in the last few minutes. So just a quick shout out. Paula Kiger, as I mentioned earlier, is one of our producers. She's based in Tallahassee, Florida. And Deborah Bernick is right here in my neck of the woods. She called it DC, but I know she's in Arlington. She's also a loyal customer of my daughter's Girl Scout cookies. Debbie, as soon as we get word on when sales will start, you'll be one of the first people we reach out to. Thank you very much for your support. And our friend Stephen Kaplan is joining us. Stephen is in Ramsey, New Jersey. He's a great photographer, worked at the New York Times for a number of years. Stephen, always a pleasure. We still need to get together for pizza once all of this winds down, once we can start traveling and seeing each other. We're getting close. We're getting close. I wasn't sure if she was going to make it today. My mom is watching from Hastings-on-Hudson. She's usually up early watching, but I know that she's probably doing some final packing because she's coming down to our neck of the woods. She's visiting us for the week, for Thanksgiving week. So we're going to be picking her up after later this afternoon. So Mom, look forward to seeing you. Thank you for watching. And always appreciate your support. I'm glad I'll be able to actually see you on Sunday instead of just talking to you on Sundays like I usually do. So with that, what I want to do is go through the paper a little bit and just kind of show you what the front page sections are. And then we'll bring on our guests. As a reminder, our guests today are Kaye Whitehead and Walter Greason, who are both professors. So we want to thank them for joining us. So let's take a look at what's in the paper this morning. You can see the paper laid out here. I'm using my trusty pencil cam. Paula can share a link to pencil cam in the comments. It's really helped us in terms of production. You'll notice a little bit of the lighting is a little odd. There are a couple of days in the year when the light hits a little portal window above the door here in the dining room. Nothing I can do about it. It's unless I tape it over, which I don't know if my wife would really want me to. So let's take a quick look. The front page above the fold, the display story, a mining site owned by a Chinese company in Kisanfu, Democratic Republic of Congo. The land contains a vast reserve of cobalt, vital to making electric car batteries. This is all about the power struggle over cobalt. And we'll see inside there are 4 pages of a very beautifully designed layout. Great story by Diane Searcy, Michael Forsyth, and Eric Lipton. Andrea Zagata did the layout for this piece. The lead story, how Pelosi got her Democrats over the finish line. That's an important piece of legislation was passed over the weekend. So we'll definitely want to follow that. And right on top, Kenosha trial shows nation split by guns. That's a news analysis piece by Glenn Thrush. That's, of course, a reference to Kyle Rittenhouse. Midwestern city where rounder is greener, all about Carmel, Indiana, with traffic circles. A story based Dateline Paris, bloody scrawl, dead socialite, and a mystery. And then a piece about this is poison, fentanyl jolts drug epidemic. I just watched the ending of Dope Sick with Pam, just the last bit of the last episode. Just incredible story. What's going on across what has been going on, continues to go on across the country. So let's take a look at what else is in the paper. Sunday Review. There's a piece by E. Tammy Kim on the front lines of the trucker rebellion at the nation's ports. That's certainly going to make the supply chain issues more challenging. In the South, two opinions. One of every 5 women of reproductive age lives in a county with a high risk of maternal health. And then an editorial preventing traffic stops from turning deadly. This is a follow-up on a really incredible piece of video work that the Times put out. I think it was about 1 or maybe 2 weeks ago, when cops refer to cars as deadly weapons and then end up shooting the driver. There's a piece on Happy Holidays, how to let the joy back this pandemic winter. And that's, you can see what the image is. It's a snow globe, if you can see that, kind of curved up from the bottom, a big snow globe. So we'll take a look there. Sunday Business, again, these photos dominate the front page. So you can see that whole photo there on Sunday Business. This is about high school, the remake. Teenage comedies on big business are now risky, turning a campus into a movie lab. Might fix that. Interesting. Career coaches tell clients to see themselves. So that's Sunday Business. Now this was interesting. I saw this when I was opening my paper, the Daily Knot. I was trying to figure out, this is Follow the Thread to Our Tie Collection. This is a advertisement, but I'm looking for on the cover where it says it's from Hermes up here, but I don't see anything that says it's an ad, which is what I would assume it is. The remote techic issue. So, but it all says the Daily Knot, Fall Winter 2021. It has letters to the editor, horoscope, and I'm not seeing anything that indicates what it is. So that's really, really interesting. We'll have to take a look at that if we have time at the end of the show. Sunday Styles, the Sunday Styles section, A Future Without Kids. Increasingly, climate devastation and the coronavirus pandemic are weighing heavily on many people's attitudes about bringing children into the world. Arts and Leisure, Up and Away after a 19-month delay. During the button-down 1950s, Cary Grant and other celebrities experimented with LSD, the inspiration behind the new musical, Flying Over Sunset. Will Broadway audiences go along for the trip? And that you can see the front page photo there. And then one of the other topics we'll be talking about, front page of the book review, is A Nation's Legacy, Adam Hochschild's review of the 1619 Project, edited by Nikole Hannah-Jones, Caitlin Roper, Elena Silverman, and Jake Silverstein. We will talk about that, of course, later in the show. And the New York Times Magazine cover with voters anxious, and I'm going to see if I can get the light off so you don't get the glare. With voters anxious about crime in LA, can the DA still reform the country's largest justice system? George Gascon's gamble. So that is what the paper holds in store for us today. Again, we have 2 great guests, and we're going to talk about a number of different issues. So with that, I'm going to just do a quick reminder again. Kaye Whitehead and Walter Greason are our guests. We're going to be talking about the Rittenhouse verdict. We're talking about the 1619 Project. We're talking about critical race theory, which might need a little bit more context and explanation, and then other topics that'll come up during the show. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Kaye Whitehead and Walter Greason. Kaye, Walter, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very good. About 7:45, but I love the chance to talk with everybody.
Walter's based on the in Minnesota, having moved out there from New Jersey earlier this year. So Walter, we'll start with you. We ask all of our guests this first question, and we certainly want to. Kaye has sent a chance to think about her answer. It's been, we're getting close to 2 years now with the pandemic in March, right? So a year and 3 quarters, I guess. We hope you and your family have been healthy, your close friends. How have you fared over the pandemic? How have things been?
Very interesting time in my personal life. The week before, I was at an event for the Federal Reserve meeting with business economists in DC, and did a lot of work. It was actually the Monday that they were in the press club and announced, oh, we have this new concern that we're going to call COVID-19. And immediately the markets reacted, and it set off a crazy week at the end of February last year. And, the real crazy bit for me was when my mother was passing away. And it was not from COVID. It was really just old age, and it was her time. But it framed the entire experience for me. It's just completely transformed my life. I've spent the last decade really supporting my parents and making sure my birth family was secure. And so more recently, brand new job, new home, new location. Everything in my life has changed, and not necessarily because of COVID. We've been very healthy and very blessed. Everybody double vaccinated. My 10-year-old just received his first vaccination on Friday. And so it's been pretty amazing. But I will say here in Minnesota, I am concerned. We've become a little bit more casual. I'd love to see the governor exert a little bit more leadership to encourage people to wear masks and continue to social distance. Pretty much I can go out to the grocery store, and if I'm wearing a mask, some people will look at me like, why are you still doing that? And I'm like, because our numbers are rising and we need to protect each other. So no, it's just been unbelievable time frame. But my college especially is very proactive. And so the work that we're doing, I think has a horizon now that we can look forward to a day where COVID is not dominating every aspect for ourselves.
And we want to share, Patricia's sentiments. Our deepest condolences, Walter, on the loss of your mother at the very beginning, but also, of course, congratulations on the move to Minnesota after 9 years at Monmouth. That's a huge, and I know you're still close to folks in Jersey, still doing a lot of work out there, but a lot to process, a lot to work through in these crazy times that we live in.
Colleagues like Kaye keep me afloat. So, I'm always thankful both to you, Neil, and to Kaye. You guys are just some of the best people in my life. Thank you. Thank you,
Walter. Kaye, same question to you. Over the last year and 3 quarters, what has how has COVID treated you, your loved ones, your family? Please share, if you will.
So in looking at how COVID has impacted us, my experience has been a little bit different from Walter's. I have a radio show here in Baltimore City on the East Coast called Today with Dr. Kaye. And so we deeply engage with these issues from the very beginning. Because we have my family, my husband and my 2 sons, we have an adopted son who is from South Korea. And I remember him telling us in December of 2019, alerting us that something was happening in China, that we should keep our eye on it because his parents had alerted him that something was going on. We made the decision in January to begin covering COVID-19 on our show. We began doing a COVID Minute. And we were watching as the country was mourning the loss of Kobe Bryant, which was really the main big story on all the front pages. But in the corner, even in the New York Times, in the corner was a small box that talked about this virus, this novel coronavirus that was taking place and making its way through China. And so we received a lot of complaints early on my show because we covered it every day. We did a coronavirus minute, and people kept saying, this doesn't pertain to us. It's not going to be a big deal here in America. Why are you devoting so much time on your show? And I was telling people early on, get masks, get hand sanitizer, get canned goods. And as we began to watch and the numbers climbed up, we then decided to stay live every day. So instead of hunkering down, which I really believe everyone should have done, we still would mask up and go into the studio because I felt it was important to continue to be a live news source, particularly for the community here in Baltimore City. Maryland is one of the highest vaccinated states. I mean, my entire family is double vaccinated. We're still wearing masks everywhere. The opposite of Walter, if you go into a place here in Baltimore City, in Annapolis, anywhere in Maryland, and you're not wearing a mask, that's when you get the strange looks. People are expecting you to wear a mask. I think I was giving a talk at a school and I took off my mask just to take a drink of water. And I immediately started talking, and at least 4 or 5 teachers said, "Hey, put the mask back on."
Wow.
And I was on the stage and they were in the audience, but there is a constant reminder that we're still in the midst of this pandemic, and that Maryland as a whole and Baltimore City specifically will continue to stand strong. For my family, everyone has made it through. My parents are triple vaccinated, which I think is a new terminology now.
Yeah, right.
And I'm excited because in visiting my parents for the first time since 2019, just last weekend, sitting with my father and my mother and realizing how COVID-19 for the boomer generation has taken a little piece of their spirit. I think the quarantining, the fear has been really difficult. My father laid out for me that when he did the math, he lost one friend or classmate or church member per week last year. And so he is mourning almost every day as they're now doing funerals and they're catching up, and he's kind of doing a checklist as he's realizing that he still has friends and classmates and church members who are dying from COVID-19, though it's not being covered with the kind of intensity that we covered it last year.
Sure. I want to bring in a couple of folks who just started watching, joining us. Randall Bear, glad to be here again. Good morning from Manchester, Michigan. And we have Ron Thomas, who is a friend of the show. He was a guest actually just before your show, Walter. Ron is based in Dubai. He was in New York that weekend, but he is always a great loyal watcher. Thank you, Ron. We have Mary C. Curtis joining us from Charlotte, North Carolina, after a week busy with her column and podcast and broadcast experiences on everything from voting rights to criminal justice, contemplating with alarm the implications of the Rittenhouse verdict. And we'll certainly get to that. Big shout out to Mary as well. She was the host of the Southern Poverty Law Center's 50th anniversary celebration, which we were proud to produce as Digimentors. So thank you, Mary. Great job with that show. Ellen Austin saying she wouldn't miss this show for the world. So already have some expectations, Walter and Kaye. I know you'll deliver, but people are looking forward to dealing with some of these really important topics. She's saying the consequences of this verdict are frightening indeed. And then Lisa Borden is saying there's never really anything but lax in Georgia. So we've seen this really big swing in terms of different states and how they've approached it. Florida and Texas stand out because of their governors, but it's something we're going to have to keep an eye on. Mary's hometown is Baltimore, Kaye, so some Baltimore love there. And Dr. Chandrasekhar says, thank you, clear-eyed compassion for the work you do. And I want to emphasize the Dr. Whitehead. Lots of respect for PhDs in my family. My wife got a PhD from the University of Washington. It is Dr. Pamela Jean Stumpo, not Mrs., as you put in your Twitter account, Kaye. Doctor, not Mrs. I think it's Mommy Black Activist. Is that
Black Mommy Activist?
Black Mommy Activist, exactly. Julian Chambliss is watching as well on YouTube. So Julian, thank you. If these are folks that you know or you shout out, Walter, you're grinning from ear to ear. Julian is a colleague of yours, I assume?
Yes, he and I collaborated on a book that dropped right before the Black Panther movie called Cities Imagined, talking about how we preserve historic African-American communities in the United States and around the world. And so seeing Julian online is just an amazing pleasure. He's a professor at Michigan State University. They took a tough hit on the football field yesterday, but his work is always an inspiration for his students and colleagues.
Rub it in, right? Rub it in. So with that, I want to get to some of the topics we want to discuss before we get to the paper. We'll jump right into the Rittenhouse verdict. Kaye, I'm going to ask you to go there first. You actually were on your radio show. You do your show every day, and you had you went live with the news, right, on Friday afternoon.
We did. I do want to begin by saying hi to my colleague Lynn Elk. She is here with me at Loyola University, just got a new position. So, good morning, Lynn. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always good to have you in places where I exist and I move and I do my work. So, thank you again. We were standing by on Friday, and I actually have been standing by all week because we weren't sure when the verdict was going to be released. We've been talking to lawyers, we spoke to judges. We've been speaking to professors and to students of all different races and ethnicities prior to the verdict coming out to get a sense of what people thought would happen. And overwhelmingly, which is not a surprise. I mean, sometimes research surprises you and sometimes it does not. I was finding that overwhelmingly within the Black community, and talking to my colleagues, talking to friends, and talking to experts, they believed that Kyle Rittenhouse would walk. They knew he was not going to be held accountable because Kyle Rittenhouse, though he was the person physically on trial, what was really at stake here is dealing with the future of vigilantism in America, the future of what it means to be Black and to protest in public spaces, and the future of what it means to be white and to stand in allegiance and solidarity with Black social justice issues and with Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter was on trial here. White supremacy was on trial here. And we are watching as this country, starting with the shift that took place with the election of Barack Obama, I believe we can go back that far, when you had a major organizing, according to the New York Times, called it the white lash that took place after that election. And we have watched this slow march towards where we are now. It wasn't just the crying on the stand from Kyle Rittenhouse. It was also the way the defense put up their trial, the way in which the focus shifted from being about what happened on the streets to the fate of this young child, because we know in America, as Michelle Obama said, white boys tend to fail up as Black boys tend to fail out. We know that this society tends to age our children by 3 to 5 years, and they tend to infantilize white boys in particular 3 to 5 years. So he was seen as a child. There was no focus on the gun that he had, the AR-15. There was no focus on the people that were killed and what they were protesting. It was a focus on what can we do about the future of this young boy and how could we put him in prison when he has so much promise. And so when we broke in live on Friday, we were on with former Judge Billy Murphy, who is an attorney here in Baltimore City. He is the most successful defense attorney in the country. He was talking about how when he got Don King off, that was one of his first early trials, when he got Don King off, and Don King immediately said, I'm going to take the entire jury out to Las Vegas so we can all have dinner. He said, we started doing research then, and what we found that 90% of the cases are won or lost in the opening statement. It's not about the witnesses you put up. It's not about what you go from there. It's 90% across the board from the opening statement. He said, and when I watched the opening statement, it was at that moment that I realized and I knew that Kyle Rittenhouse was going to walk and that we need to be prepared because we're probably going to see it also in the trial of the men who are accused of killing and murdering and stalking Ahmaud Arbery.
Absolutely. And that's the other, trial that's been going on. And just, the way that, you look at the justice system, the role that judges play, the way that people react to people in the jury. It's not the judge in that case, unlike Kyle Rittenhouse, but, for the defense attorneys, there are too many pastors in the room. The family has too many, it's just ridiculous in terms of doing anything they can to try and, stifle that support and kind of not call attention to what we're seeing with our own eyes, which is just systemic racism and absolute, it's ugliness, and folks want to celebrate it and honor it in terms of the people who are supporting Rittenhouse and others. Lisa Borden has a great comment. Cozy relationship between law enforcement and white extremist militias is terrifying. And the Southern Poverty Law Center recently reported on how these groups are operating at the southern border and being tolerated or even welcomed by Border Patrol. I want to share as well, when we're talking about the Rittenhouse verdict, Charles Blow had a column, and we included it in our Twitter thread advertising the show. But I want to pull up his the quote that I pulled out from that, where he says, whether a vigilante is viewed as radical or righteous, and I'll make that even a little bit bigger, whether vigilante is viewed as radical or righteous is often a condition of the skin they're in. And the verdict in the Rittenhouse case is only likely to encourage more vigilantes, those who want to keep or impose order, those who are irked by the idea that disorder could flow from injustice, those who don't want to see the streets filled with people demanding equity. The great threat and real possibility is that there are other Rittenhouses out there, young men who watched this verdict and saw how the right has embraced and celebrated a murderer and now want to follow his lead. The worst thing for America would be that this case becomes exemplar and precursor. Very poignant words from Charles Blow, a former guest on the show. Walter, I want to turn to you briefly. You actually wrote a piece in the Washington Post earlier in the year about the January 6th insurrection and where that came from and how that's built on this same foundation of hatred for minorities, people of color, etc. We'll put that on screen in just a second, but can you share your thoughts and kind of what how you see the Rittenhouse verdict in the course of history?
Absolutely. And it's very striking for me. I'm teaching a course on the history of civil rights in the United States right now. And that work often fixates on the activist movements that rightly challenged Jim Crow and dismantled systems of public, formal, de jure segregation. The ways that there were signs that kept people out from different hotels and bathrooms and water fountains. But we often ignore, and it's been one of the huge parts of my work in the last 20 years, the ways that white citizens councils adapted after the Brown decision, after the civil rights laws. There's basically a 20-year campaign, maybe 25-year campaign, following the Fair Housing Act of 1968 to limit and to expand state authority to protect discrimination, often using the language of either economics or religious freedom. And so these two things have converged and been sanctioned for 40 years, 50 years here in the United States, where we've ignored the growth of white nationalism and the way it's continually gotten more radical and more violent. I look at the effort of the Timothy McVeigh to attack the federal government, people like the Unabomber. This has been an increasing trend where now we lead up to January 6th. We see this ongoing commitment through the way that people attack their school boards and are threatening to engage in violence and forcibly remove people from local school boards. This recent announcement that Kyle Rittenhouse should be a congressional intern. It's all geared, and it wasn't just Donald Trump, but it's all geared to terrorize people who disagree with them and to cow people into maintaining a status quo that is killing millions of Americans and has killed hundreds of millions of Americans across the nation's history. And so this need to kind of negotiate and demand equal justice for all people, that's the core of my work. And, of course, I'm here in the shadow of George Floyd and the daily work of building out educational systems that actually dismantle the kinds of assumptions that led Derek Chauvin to kill George Floyd, to build systems along with folks like Keith Ellison and Ilhan Omar that actually have institutional power to treat people fairly and to give everyone a voice in our society. Too often these debates are about silencing or marginalizing white people, and that is never the goal. It's the goal that all of us have a voice and we all have authority to participate as equal citizens together in shaping our communities and the nation.
I really appreciate that. I think that the clear, in terms of the foundation, when we think about how we got here, this didn't happen overnight, right? This is 400 years in the making, which leads us to the 1619 Project that Nikole Hannah-Jones launched with her colleagues from the Times last year. We did an incredible show with Sonny Slaughter to focus on the 1619 Project, she and her colleagues released 2 books this week one about the project itself, and then also a kid's picture book. Your blog post, Walter, Nikole Hannah-Jones is the most important journalist in the history of the New York Times. She has transformed her field in ways that place her among the most important journalists in world history. That I don't think that you're, that this is hyperbole. I mean, this is incredible in terms of what she has done. The attack she's come under, certainly from the right, questioning the 1619 Project, questioning not just the scholarship, but the basic premise. To me, when I read this, it's an attempt to recenter our history around the Black experience. And there are so many people who did not understand how awful it was, but then also how it extended over time, the legacy of slavery when it comes to housing issues, when it comes to transportation, healthcare, et cetera. Can you tell us a little bit about the 1619 Project, Walter, and the larger conversation that Nikole and her colleagues started?
Yeah, the 1619 Project, again, huge antecedents that stretch back decades. I think back to Gary Nash and the debate around national history standards that actually has informed a lot of the attacks that have come after Nikole Hannah-Jones. The debate about what is legitimately our history. I will never forget in doing promotions and supporting the way the project would grow and at its point of release. It was Newt Gingrich came out and said, this is just propaganda. We can ignore this. And that's been said so many times about what African-American scholars produce and the voices of African-American journalists, folks in the media, folks I still see every day, African-American economists ignored and their research kind of pushed to the side. I think of someone like Trevon Logan or William Darity. These folks across the field are trying to correct errors that are rooted in white supremacy in the basic ways that we think and we act when we think about our communities, when we think about housing markets and equity markets, how people save money, how we see the debates around labor unions and the roles of actually getting better wages and better benefits for working people. All of this work hinges on so much of the African-American experience across American history that whenever, particularly Black women's status improves in the society, it improves the status for everyone. And we've seen this, thousands of cases. And so when we listen to the voice of someone like Nikole Hannah-Jones or Kaye Whitehead, we're actually listening to the best instincts of our heart and our mind and creating the most successful, the most equitable society that we can. We can't continue to just believe in the folks who we hold in traditional authority, in law enforcement, in government, in the private sector especially. We need new perspectives. We need new approaches to how we imagine what freedom is and the way it's then operationalized and institutionalized. There's got to be a fundamental change. And that's what I really respect what Nikole Hannah-Jones has done. She brings what has happened in the historical profession to the public and makes the entire nation and the world grapple with this. As much as we struggle in the United States with these questions, there are similar struggles in Canada. There are similar struggles in the UK. Around the world, people need these new approaches to how they understand themselves and their societies. And that's what the 1619 Project does.
And one of the things, about the 1619 Project is certainly about understanding our history, understanding the impact of the history that we have. Certainly it's going to be a question of it'll take time to work through that history. I want to bring in Kaye on this, but to focus more on history and the role that history plays in educating students, our community, society, et cetera. Critical race theory is something that's been bandied about. There's been a lot of criticism of it. It turned an election here in Virginia. It's just there's legislation in various states. How does critical race theory and the debate around that, Kaye, work into this?
Thank you for that question. I just want to add something to what Walter said
Please,
earlier,
please.
and what you had mentioned, that the 1619 Project, in terms of using the lens of the Black experience, I would actually add, or maybe expand on that by saying that the 1619 Project uses the lens of the American history experience. That what we have been learning thus far has not been American history, it's been white American history. And it has been accepted as the norm since the foundations of this country were laid down. That there was only one perspective. That perspective is built in keeping people as property. It was built in a system of slavery. It was built in a system of segregation, that there's only one historical narrative. And that narrative, though limited in its scope, is the only one that's been accepted and that's been taught. I would argue that 1619 as a project, as a mindset, actually refocuses the lens on our entire American experience. And in fact, I think the next level or layer to 1619 would be another retelling of our history that really looks at the indigenous perspective on what it means to be in this land, on these shores, to deal with the full force of white supremacy coming at you on every single aspect of your life. We're talking about getting
Absolutely.
to, yes, a better historical narrative. I think it is time for us to begin to tear down all of these perspectives and say, what is the true American story? Now, I am a huge supporter and have taught and have lifted up 1619, but I just came out of having conversations with members of different indigenous communities from the Navajo tribe, talking about, lies my teacher taught me about Columbus Day, about Thanksgiving, about the fact that people don't know the true understanding of the indigenous community, the breadth and depth of what it means to be an American native to this shore. So I would just kind of add that on the table as we think about and reframe perhaps the next level to our discussion of history. I see Walter's raising his hand.
Before Walter, without question, Kaye, I take that as misspeaking. Certainly the American experience, not just the Black experience. Walter.
So just a quick example to build on what Kaye said. I've been very fortunate to go around the world and learn from different people in different countries. And one thing that struck me in New Zealand was that the Maori population there, the indigenous population of that region, actually their language is taught in elementary school, and every citizen of the country understands Maori. This is a way that they actually have a different set of values that are embedded in the earliest lessons children are offered. And so much of my work, one of the most exciting things about being in the Twin Cities area is that there are substantial communities of Native American, American Indian educators all throughout the region, across the Dakotas, into Wisconsin and Michigan, who are transforming school systems and introducing indigenous ideas into not just the way we teach, but the way that we build homes, the way that we think about our banking systems. There are extraordinary opportunities we have here in the United States right now that are in line with exactly what Kaye is saying, that as we take on and learn more, not just about African American history or Latino history or Asian American history, when we start to drill down and see ourselves as part of the struggle for indigenous sovereignty, this questions about the abolition of the way we think about prison and law enforcement structure, how do we actually engage that at a basic level so we have a new vocabulary, a new set of ideas that we can then begin to build a better society with? And so that's really important to me, is that as we think about indigenous engagement and how do we actually learn to connect with indigenous community, language is a huge place we can start. And so I hope we can continue that conversation going forward.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to take us back, thank you for that, to critical race theory and to thinking about that. I stand in a number of places, I think that we all do. So in addition to being a professor and a radio host and a columnist for the Afro newspaper, and I chose the Afro because that's the only paper my dad still gets at home, no matter where he is. And so I want him to see his college dollars being well spent. I'm also the president of the National Women's Studies Association. And we partnered with Ms. Magazine and, of course, my institute, the Karson Institute, named after my father, to put forth the Journey to Justice, a critical race theory primer. I am a graduate of Lincoln University, the first HBCU, and I learned critical race theory as a lens when I was in college, which, let's be very clear, was very rare. I just happened to be taught by Dr. Jane Bond Howard, the cousin to Julian Bond. We had Kwame Ture and others coming up to campus on the weekends, and they would have us engaged with these issues as undergraduates. So I didn't see critical race theory as a big thing. To me, it was just how we were being taught while we were in school. And so when I became a middle school teacher, I took a lot of those teachings into the classroom. It was really understanding how race was codified into the law. That when we talk about the law, we have to understand how race gets layered over that. And then even to use Kimberly Crenshaw, the founder of the African American Policy Forum, who's one of the originators of critical race theory when she was with Derek Bell, thinking about intersectionality. How do all these points come together? And then how does that get applied to the law? So when they first started attacking critical race theory, I was one of the people going, okay, they can't be serious. Who's using critical race theory in first grade? Who's using critical race theory in eighth grade? Unless you are either someone who has been trained in the law and you were taught by professors who understood the African American experience and racism within the law, or B, you attended the HBCU and you had radical Black professors who wanted to make sure that you understand that when we look at the 13th Amendment or the 20th Amendment or the First Amendment, if you don't bring race and class and gender into those amendments, then you would think equality gets blindly applied, and it does not. And so I thought it was just another dog whistle. And I have been confirmed right and wrong. One, it is a dog whistle. Critical race theory is an easy thing to attack because what we're looking at right now, every time this country makes any type of racial progress, there's always a pushback. We always move back. And history will back me up. Every time we move forward with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, you see Black communities on fire in 1966. Every time we move forward with all the legislation, all the awareness that happened after the brutal murder of George Floyd, the brutal murder of Breonna Taylor, the brutal murder of Ahmaud Arbery, the confrontation with Christian Cooper by Amy Cooper up in New York, there was going to be a white lash. There was going to be a backing up and trying to move us to a place where only whites are the ones who are allowed at the table, and the people at power want to continue to be in power. We knew it was going to happen. We didn't know the full extent. We didn't know what direction it was going to come from. But those of us who have been born and bred in this American system, who grew up with parents from the Jim Crow South, as my daddy said, just keep one eye open even when you're sleeping, because it's going to come. Critical race theory became the dog whistle. So I was right knowing it was going to come. This is where I was wrong. I was wrong in the beginning thinking, well, they really couldn't use critical race theory. Something else was going to happen. Critical race theory has become the catchphrase to talking about Black history, to talking about Indigenous history, to talking about women's histories, to talking about anybody else's history other than white American history. That when they attack critical race theory and they seek to remove the teaching about Dr. King and Cesar Chavez and the Civil Rights Movement and Susan B. Anthony and Harriet Tubman, what they're doing is they're erasing every person from the narrative but the white American male, which is in the circle of privilege in their own mind, and they're centering them back in the middle. Critical race theory has made it difficult to bring those other perspectives into the classroom. And when you fight, I believe there are a couple different battlegrounds, and I always argue there are at least two definite and third possible. I grew up in the age of spades, right? You have two books and a possible. There are two definite battlegrounds in this country and a possible. One major battleground in this country is the ballot. That has always been the battleground, which is why they lynched Black folks when they went to try and go and vote. That when we were able to vote, we sent Black men down to DC for the first time thinking about Heron Rebel. So the ballot has always been a battleground. The second battleground is the classroom. If you can train students up early, then you don't have to be surprised about where they go. Loyola Ignatius said it. Hitler said it, if I can bring Hitler in. But both of them said, give me a child until the age of 7, and I will show you the man they're going to be. Let me indoctrinate them early, and then they'll grow up with that belief. I don't even have to touch bases with them again. And then I would say that third, which is impossible, too definite and possible, is the church. That is the third battleground. And we see within all these spaces, critical race theory as the lens, as a defining voice, as though the hammer they're using to crush down other voices is taking place in all three of those spaces.
And what we've been showing is this Journey to Justice, a critical race theory primer that you put together with Ms. Magazine, the National Women's Studies Association, and the Karson Institute, which you are the director of, with some great resources, great content, lesson plans, etc. Paula has shared the link to this piece, so I certainly encourage people to check this out. Kaye, thank you very much. As Patricia said, your passion is heartfelt, certainly, and Dr. Chandrasekhar, 100%. Absolutely agree with what you're saying, so thank you very much for that. These are the issues that are facing us today. This is the backdrop for society. You know, in 1 week, to have the books come out for the 1619 Project, to have the Rittenhouse verdict, which, you know, I think actually, you know, we can turn to pop culture. You know, Saturday Night Live, if folks watched last night, they had a bit where they had a white liberal expressing shock and, oh my God, I can't believe that this verdict came out that way. And they had a black man as another commentator saying, yeah, I mean, what's the big, like, this is not news. This is what's been going on for years. And I think that's really, you know, I think that juxtaposition is really, really telling. But in this same week, to be able to deal with these issues, and then the ongoing discussions around critical race theory and the work that both of you have been doing. Thank you very much for kind of adding some context to that, adding some background, and helping folks understand part of the work that you're doing as educators. It doesn't end in the classroom, right? You have the radio show, Kaye. Walter, your work on Twitter and in online discussion forums, etc. It's a 24/7 gig when you're an educator. And thank you for joining us early on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, Neil, I want to try to supplement what you and Kaye have put out for us here. So much of my work since 1990 has been about confronting the construction of white identity. That this notion of what Kaye is saying about that early level of education, that's what's provoked this confrontation. That last year in 2020, by May or June, in response to these unjustified, if you know, even if they go unpunished, killings of African Americans and abuses by law enforcement that are not held accountable, that process began to pull in young white people, people outside of the African American, outside of the Latino community, to galvanize international protests to demand that there needed to be change, structural change. And so these issues became the wedge, especially after the November election. The way that it turned into a campaign that led up to January 6th was all around preserving how people are socialized, told to think of themselves as white, particularly people who see themselves as white in educational settings, in court settings. How do you actually start to see yourself in a different way that says, okay, I've been told that I'm white, but I can actually resonate. I can feel what's happening with these protest movements. It's not accidental that Kyle Rittenhouse kills 2 people, injures another, none of them African American. But as many of my colleagues mentioned immediately after the trial, the verdict was released, is that once they had decided to stand up against racism, somehow they were no longer white. And they were allowed to be treated as if they were black, or they had somehow rebelled or created a chaos that was intolerable, that now must be sanctioned through either, you know, beating and incarceration, or through lethal sanction by vigilantes. And so this construction of white identity is what's really on the table. right now is how do we understand what it takes and how whiteness as an idea has been manufactured. And so I've written a lot about David Roediger. I've written a lot about folks like Tim Wise. There are a lot of white nationalist scholars that have gained prominence over the last 5 years in the media. But at structural levels, we have educators who are able to talk about how white does not have to be racist. And so they start to separate this sense of identity and they start to break down, well, these are the places in Europe where different groups of people came from, different languages they spoke, different religions they practiced, but that wasn't always considered white. Irish people were not always considered white. Italian people were not always considered white. And so Nell Irvin Painter's book is the definitive book on this. It's the history of white people. It talks about enlargements of whiteness. And we're seeing this even in the Latinx community right now, about who can pass for white, who can actually stand up and say, well, I'm not going to be a part of that. I want to craft a different kind of indigenous or Black identity. And so those questions are the ones that are at the heart of the controversy right now. We have nationalists, a very small segment of the overall white population, attempting to reimpose a sense of racial discipline on other white Americans to make sure that they do not form multi-ethnic coalitions with African Americans, with indigenous people, with people from the Latin American diaspora. That is the question we have to answer. Are we going to build a nation? And this has come up in a couple different ways, but one really poignant one is we've gone from e pluribus unum, from many to one people, to one nation under God, where the litmus test is about your evangelical Christianity. That if you're not an evangelical Christian, and particularly a white evangelical Christian, you are suspect and must be silenced, must be marginalized. And that's the project that has been amplified in the last 6 or 7 months. And we have a choice to do something different in the next year. These next year midterms and then the presidential election in 2024 are going to be, do we choose a path where you don't have to be a white evangelical Christian to be an American, especially a large property owner, a very wealthy person, to really be a full citizen? Or do we move towards a world where all of us have an equal stake, no matter how much money we have, no matter what religion we practice, no matter what language we speak, no matter what our complexion or our hair texture is? That's the kind of moment we're at right now, and we need to be vocal about it. We need to stand up in every context and say, we want open doors, we want open opportunities, we want equity, there must be justice.
I want to highlight one thing before we move on to the paper, Kaye. Just want to highlight one thing that Walter said, and to reinforce that, that white does not equal racism. There may be systemic racism in our community, in our institutions. Not all whites are racist. No one's saying that. No one's making that claim. It's a small percentage of people who are really pushing this. But I think that the understanding is that when you see racism and you call it out, people, the criticism comes in that you're calling all whites racist. That's not the case here by any means. It's I think a question of understanding our history, understanding our collective experience, as Kaye mentioned earlier, our American experience, and how that's led us to this place. Kaye, I'll let you have the final word before we turn to the paper.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to agree. White does not equal racist, but whiteness does. Whiteness is a social construct that's built on this notion that white people need to be centered. And I think part of the work that white people who stand in solidarity with Black social justice issues, with Black Lives Matter, part of the work is understanding you have now been moved from column A, go read Nell Painter's book, The History of White People, to column B, and then go read Ibram Kendi and Keisha Blaine's edited volume 400 Souls. And you understand that throughout history, when white people have aligned themselves with Black social justice issues, you are then a target. Your life is now disposable. You're expendable. I'm thinking about Goodman and Schwerner in 1964, Viola Liuzzo in 1965. That if you stand with Black social justice issues, you are considered to be expendable, like we are. So We're talking about the work to heal a nation. Yes, it's only a small percentage that Neil just pointed out, but I want to just argue that if the small percentage of people with power are the ones who determine who gets invited to the table, then 5 people can make a big difference. The small percentage of power are people who are now lawyers and judges, because let's remember that Donald Trump put more judges into lifetime appointments than any other presidency in modern history in one term. He put more than most did in 2 terms. So now you have the gatekeepers, young white men under the age of 50 who lean heavily to the right. So if you're talking a small percentage, yeah, maybe only a small percentage, but they have a lot of power and they are shaping the direction of this country.
Certainly, absolutely. The last thing we'll show for folks before we move in, because there's just so much good content, so much to try and cover. But this has been a great conversation with Walter Greason and Kaye Whitehead. I want to show Shree's newsletter from this week that just came out earlier this morning. And I'll bring that up in just a second. He led with the Rittenhouse verdict, understandably. The Rittenhouse verdict is shameful. He has a tweet from Nikole Hannah-Jones. In this country, you can even kill white people and get away with it if those white people are fighting for Black lives. This is the legacy of 1619. I encourage everyone to check out Shree's newsletter. You can find it on substack.com, shree.substack.com. We'll get that URL for you right there. And it features an essay by our colleague, Robert Anthony, who's actually from Wisconsin, who worked in Kenosha. Kenosha takes a giant step back, but needs to move forward. So certainly encourage folks to check that out when you get a chance. So with that, we want to turn to the paper at 9:30 in the morning. It's been a great conversation. We could be going for hours, I'm sure. But we also want to take a look at what's in the paper again today. As a reminder, our guests are Walter Greason and Kaye Whitehead. And it's been a fascinating discussion, absolutely. So with that, let's take a look at what's in the paper today. And we'll focus on that. And what we'll do is we'll have Kaye and Walter with us on the screen. If you see something that jumps out at you, please feel free to let me know. As we mentioned earlier, we had the front page section. When we open it up, we'll take a look at page 2 and 3, which is always very interesting. They have telling the untold story of sushi in the Inside the Times, which is kind of the Times Insider column. The story behind how the stories are put together. They have the of interest section, which gives you highlights of what's in the paper. The sketchbook, and then at the bottom, you'll see this here to help, how to exercise with chronic pain. This is a lot of what the Times is doing in terms of service journalism. So it's really interesting to see that. One of the things that we've talked about is that this top right corner, Monica Rich Karson, a jewelry company, used to be a Tiffany's ad for about 100 years. And only in the last few months did they stop. But they paid extra to get that same spot for almost 100 years. So let's take a look at what's inside. In the international section, a furry national symbol too busy for its own good. This is a story from Canada about beavers, about a beaver dam. The full page ad, interesting. Surround yourself with the Times. Discover the New York Times' first AR-first journalism. So that's an interesting graphic. The New York Times reporting is now even more immersive. Explore visual news stories with unparalleled clarity. Get even closer to the best product reviews, or play the New York Times crossword like never before. All that and more, powered by Spark AR. And they have a QR code at the bottom of the page, which I'll show you. So if folks want to check that out, New York Times is doing more interesting things every day with technology. Myanmar's notorious army faces morale crisis as more soldiers defect. You see ads for wine. And then here's a good story. Vaccines arrival in South Sudan is cold comfort. photographs and text by Lindsay Adario, incredible photographer. And I actually haven't seen her write pieces before, but she's an incredible photographer. So this piece is from Sudan.
Neil.
If I can, we're both.
You got it, Kaye. Go for it.
I'm telling you, I wanted to stop there because I think that part of the debate that we're having now, as we're thinking about America opening back up and people moving into their third vaccine dose, is the argument that was made early on that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, although I know the New York Times has, is that even if America does 3 doses or 10 doses, if the rest of the world is not getting equal access to vaccines, then we're never going to be able to travel freely. And so this article in particular caught my attention this morning because even though the vaccines are now starting to get to places, the comfort is that it's not moving quick enough. They're not getting access to everything they need. And you have this inequity that in this particular instance will impact everything that we're doing here.
Walter.
So what struck me in this is that it hit home. There are students from Sudan on my campus that have been struggling as they're trying to continue their studies because their families are in such danger. Both the violence and the virus have threatened them, and just every day they wake up in fear for what the news may bring. And so around the country, around the world, I really wanted to emphasize with this particular article the need to think outside of our local communities, to see what's happening in different places around the world, because there are always people around us that are connected in ways that we can't imagine. And so at the very beginning of the pandemic, I was in a different institution, different role, but I made a commitment to the people that I worked with, both my superiors, my colleagues, and the folks I was overseeing. We will engage in the ethics of care first. We will care for each other. We will give each other grace. We will support each other as we go through this enormous transition, this very difficult experience around the world. And I just wanted to take a moment in this moment with this article to reaffirm that we need to take the time to be kind and supportive of each other and not feel like this is life as normal. We're going to meet all these deadlines. We're going to continue to maintain maximum productivity. Like, this is a time for us to care. And if we're not caring, then ultimately we fail, not just individually, but we fail as a society, we fail as a species. And so this is immediate and attached to me because I think of my students and what they've been experiencing in the last several months.
Absolutely. I want to bring in a comment that Laura Silverman put in earlier. Very grateful to today's guests for their powerful voices and crucial perspectives. Your thoughts on this article is just one example. We had a great discussion earlier around some of the larger issues, but even to put this article in context was much appreciated. David K. Johnston is watching as well. He said the acquittal was predictable after the judge worked so hard to ensure it. We made reference to that in terms of the Rittenhouse verdict. And he mentions the Saturday Night Live opening sketch last night where the judge, the character playing the judge, referred to the young killer as his client. Oh no, I mean the defendant, of course. So it just highlights that as well. And Patricia Freudenberg, echoing your thoughts, Walter, spreading kindness where everyone means everyone, which is really important. So let's take a look at what else. And again, please let me know when there's something that gets your attention. We will keep going. London's tabloid changes editors, which could please Downing Street. Thousands of Austrians protest new COVID rules. Austria went to a full lockdown earlier this week because of their numbers. Here's an interesting full-page ad from Google. We keep more people safe online than anyone else in the world. Securing the software supply chain, guiding industry-wide security transformation, training cybersecurity professionals. We always pay attention to the ads as well as the content because it says a lot.
Yeah, Neil, just a quick note for everybody. If you have not read the work of Ruha Benjamin and of Sophia Umoja Noble on the way that big tech actually is shaping the world we live in today, but more importantly, shaping the world we will inhabit tomorrow. Please take a moment to learn about the ways that, yes, Google does some very good work to try and build an infrastructure that actually serves their market cap. but we're not seeing democratic access, most notably with places like Facebook or now Meta. This is something my students have been talking about a lot in our data science class. But these firms need a lot more scrutiny and attention. And typically it breaks down on partisan lines where people who are fearful of change want to attack big tech firms. I think those of us who want to embrace change have to learn more about how these systems evolve, and so that we can actually guarantee it's not just the bottom line, it's not just profits that is determining the infrastructure of the world we'll have 2 years from now or 10 years from now.
And we've been debating what's been happening in China. I'm hearing a little bit of echo.
Yep.
So when we've been looking at what's been happening in China in terms of them setting forth these restrictions on how much internet access children can have and students can have. And I'm not looking to China as the beacon of light for us, but just to take that notion of, should we as parents, should we as educators of the K through 12th grade population, should we be very concerned about how much time our children, our students are spending online? That COVID-19, in addition to exposing so many things, really pushed everyone into this online environment where it is 24/7. So yes, you're keeping people safe online. I'm wondering though about the mental and the emotional impact of having this kind of connection that is nonstop, that never turns off. And so I would challenge people to think a little bit deeper about what does it mean to put our entire lives, our safety and our security into the hands of big tech who are doing it only for the name of profit.
Absolutely. One of the things that we say is, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Yeah. Things like Facebook, Twitter does have a paid option now. Paula Kiger, one of our producers, actually signed up for Twitter Blue. In our internal conversations, she's, okay, I signed up for it. Let's see if that's the right call, etc. But if you're not paying for it, you don't own it. You don't have full control over it, and you are the product. And it's something that we, have to live with and have to contend with in terms of society. We have been using social media. I'll just fix my camera real quick. We've been using social media for years, and appreciate what it can do. Appreciate we're live on various social media platforms. We take advantage of it, but we also have to understand its the role it plays in society, the limitations. It cuts both ways. Facebook was the algorithms and its ability to polarize the communities when people log on. What it's suggesting for people is documented. At the same time, I can put up my daughter's third grade class picture and have friends from far and wide who we haven't talked to in years put in a comment and say some nice words about her, about me, about the family, etc. So it's something, and particularly Walter, I know your experience was, you mentioned your mother passing away. I know when my father passed away now 12 years ago, 2009, I was able to share that on Facebook and have people understand what I was going through without having to explain everything every time I spoke to them. So it is a double-edged sword, certainly. Julian has a comment. Open access standards for technology is an important factor for the future. What standards in terms of access are we going to support? So certainly worth considering. But I definitely appreciate those points that you.
So I think we lost Neil's sound for a second. So I'm hoping we can get him back.
Sorry about that, Walter.
Yes, sir.
I was switching back to the paper. So I was switching back to the paper, how India's farmers organized and
Neil
well-funded.
There he is.
Face down Modi, Prime Minister Modi in India. And then here is the inside. We talked about that front page story about cobalt, right? Here is 4 pages inside. Fight over cobalt rattles the shift to clean energy. Some incredible display photos. This is articles in this series to examine the global transition away from oil and the scramble for resources that will power the clean energy economy. And this is the second 2-page spread, which is interesting. I saw the designer shared it on Twitter with color photographs. So I'm curious as to whether that, it might have been in the national edition that I get in Virginia. It might be in color in the New York area.
No, this is so important because we just saw the passage, not just of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but this debate in the House that happened Friday, and I guess successfully, they adopted this much larger Build Back Better package that has $555 billion dedicated to clean energy over the next several years. And so this is a huge question, especially now as we consider inflation in the current moment, that it's largely driven by our energy costs. And so can we really make the kinds of adjustments that actually we saw in the second term under the Obama administration to make affordable energy commonplace, particularly in the developed industrial economies, but also worldwide? How do we actually create a sustainable energy infrastructure? And there are powerful folks who are investing and lobbying against that, whether it's cobalt, whether it's coal, but we need to make that shift for our climate, for the sense of kind of a stable economy, but also for just common health outcomes. When we're seeing the infrastructure bill address so much about what goes into lead, and great colleague of mine, Louise Seamster, just put out a great Twitter thread on how much leaded water is present in schools. And we need to replace all of these pipelines across the country, but we didn't really fund it to the level that we need. And that's where Build Back Better can make a difference. And we can set a standard that helps states protect our children, protect our families from lead poisoning over time. So these kinds of questions, of course, like I appreciate you sharing the article on Historic Black Neighborhood. I'm working with over 2,000, I think almost 2,500 different historic Black communities to undo the damage that the interstate highway system did, to really open up and preserve historic African-American communities, also historic Indigenous communities, now that I'm here in Minnesota. And so this is the work that's going to take the rest of my life. But the infrastructure bill takes us a quantum leap forward to do that work, to not predicate the destruction of vulnerable neighborhoods and towns and ultimately people's lives in the name of building profit and efficiency for large corporations. So this is so huge right now. Thank you so much for featuring it.
And this article is not in the print paper. Sorry, Kaye. Yes. This is not in the print paper today. This is actually online. We expect it to be in print early in the week. But this is about the highways that were built and how they bisected neighborhoods. There's money in the infrastructure bill to actually take down some of these highways. This is highlighting this cover picture, highlighting the Claiborne Expressway in New Orleans. But as Walter said, there are hundreds of neighborhoods around the country that have this kind of legacy of Black neighborhoods just being destroyed with these infrastructure projects. Kaye, you wanted to say?
Well, I just wanted to add one of my colleagues' book, Dr. Lawrence Brown, his book on the Black Butterfly, talking about Baltimore City. And one of the things that he points out, because we deal with lead in the water and lead in the soil here in Baltimore City, that the work we're doing now will not help the boomers. It will not help Generation X. It will not help the millennials. He's arguing it won't even help the zillennials. It's going to help the children of our zillennial children. That is how long it's going to take to actually clean up the lead in the water, in the soil, in the environment, and having children grow up in environments that are lead free. This is a lifetime of work that is before us to be able to clean things up for children that haven't arrived yet, because our system is so damaged. We deal with heavy redlining here in Baltimore City. We are ground zero for racially restrictive housing policies from 1910. And we see the impact of that on generations of children, and we're seeing the impact play out today. So as we talk about the Build Back Better, we talk about the infrastructure bill, we talk about the $655 million coming into Baltimore City, we know that the people that are living now, the children that are living now, will not benefit from the work that we're doing. They've already been affected, they've already been impacted, and now we need to do restorative work for them and lay the groundwork for their children.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Let's look at what else is in the paper. As we wind down, we're at the 9:49 mark, so we do want to make sure that we have a chance to wrap up appropriately. But still, So much in the paper to cover. This national story, we're having a holiday gathering. Are we nuts? That question of how are people staying safe for the holidays? Legal ways to overturn increasingly egregious gerrymanders dwindle. All part of the same conversation. These are the traffic circles. GOP may be energized, but Trump cancel culture poses a threat. This is about the infrastructure bill. And this article here, it's kind of buried a little bit, but I'm going to pull it up below the fold. With hatred on the march, Manhattan U.S. Attorney forms new civil rights unit. And of course, that's Damian Williams, who's the new U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, the first Black person to hold the post in the office's 232-year history. It takes the first Black U.S. Attorney to set up a new civil rights unit. That's what happens when we make change.
That's the infrastructure, but you got to do that in places like Kenosha too. Like it can't
Absolutely.
just be in the major metropolitan areas. That the majority of Americans live in suburbs, and so from the moment we saw the issue with Mike Brown and Ferguson, we've got to move forward. I mean, when you look at Trayvon Martin and what happens in Florida, this is out in the suburb of Orlando, and so it's not just the big cities that have to coordinate the entire metropolitan area within these states, because the federal government has been weakened, because the state governors are trying to resist these kinds of interventions. And so that's my only concern here, is that so many of the places where we need to have better oversight, they're the bastions of real resistance. And I saw it in New Jersey. Like there are just some terrible folks who are in charge of school districts, who are in charge of local government. Monmouth County is essentially run by its local sheriff. And so it does not lead to a welcoming, warm community for African Americans who have lived there historically, or Latino migrants who have moved there in the last 40 years. It's how do we actually extend beyond the Southern District of Manhattan and promote equitable, inclusive community, even in the small towns and rural areas?
Absolutely. And that was Mary Curtis reminding us that Freddie Gray had been a victim of lead poisoning as a child. Freddie Gray, of course, was killed in police custody in Baltimore several years ago. The cover of the book review is a review of the 1619 Project, A Nation's Legacy. So we'll definitely want to take a look at that later. And then you see the rest of the reviews in here. There's a interview with Deanna Gabaldon, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, author of the Outlander series, which my wife and I love to watch. So I'll take a look at that later. And a couple other stories in here. To Catch a Spy, a retired agent is under investigation in John le Carré's last completed novel. A review of Huma Abedin's book, Public and Private. The book is called Both and, A Life in Many Worlds. So you can see there are other books that are reviewed here. I'm kind of going through it quickly. But this is a continuation of the 1619 Project review, A Nation's Legacy. So the articles, the pictures to go with that: an enslaved family in Hanover County, Virginia, Lyndon Johnson and Martin Luther King at the signing of the Voting Rights Act, New York City police officers detaining a man in the Bronx on July 11th, 2017. So certainly good. And then there's an ad for Call and Response, the story of Black Lives Matter, the power of protest, a powerful exploration of Black Lives Matter for young readers as told through photographs, quotes, and informative text from Veronica Chambers and Jennifer Harlan. Veronica Chambers is a former guest on the show as well. She works on special projects for the Times. As we come to the top of the hour.
Yeah, I wanted to put in as a suggestion for a book that Kaye would love, and that I think our Baltimore folks would love. The Urban History Association's most prestigious award is called the Kenneth Jackson Prize, and it went to Paige Glotzer for a book called How the Suburbs Were Segregated. And it looks back at the 1880s and 1890s when foreign investment from the UK drove the way that Baltimore's Black Butterfly was built. And so I just definitely want to put that there. Not on the bestseller list yet, but maybe we can get it there.
And in the magazine, a nice ad for the 1619 Project book. and Born on the Water, a children's book that covers a lot of the same ground. So I want to highlight that. What I wanted to do is actually jump into the and see if the lighting is good. We haven't actually read the poem in the magazine in several issues, several episodes of the show. We used to always read the poem to close out the show, so I want to get back to that, and then I'll make a few announcements. Walter and Kaye, I'll bring you back for some final thoughts. So we'll go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. I might even hold it up for folks to read, and let's see whether we can show this on the screen a little bit better. That's a closer look for you. This is Hold Hands by David Baker, selected by Reginald Dwayne Betts. Sometimes the point takes you to some memory that is faint. The memory might not even be yours, and this is one of those poems in which David Baker has me thinking of what I've gained and lost trying to be there for my own children, for the relatives I love but don't call enough. And Hold Hands is like some of our most intimate moments. Ain't a story that's easy to understand, but it's the story we return to, hoping to remember that then we were holding hands as hands were holding us. This is Hold Hands by David Baker. We were in the trees. The white curtains opened. Your shoulders in my hands, then your knees drew upward. Rain like petals there, rain like breeze. Now the birds were in the trees, 2 stories up, our window, where blowing leaves were level with our sheets. We were in the street. We were holding hands as hands were holding us. What hands there were where we were, in trees. Our children there as songbirds were. The hands where we were in the trees were holding us there. Where we were in the street. Please the rain to please the petals in the breeze like rain. Please to draw your hair along my hands, your hands are holding us. Lines along the window lane are holding us like songs. As now the songs, the sirens in the trees, lines along the window lane. Your hair and feathers where the children are, whose curtains singing, whose hands are holding us, who cry like birds. Hold hands. The birds are in the trees. The birds are children there in cages, singing in the trees. That's the poem from this week's magazine. I want to acknowledge one of the things that we always say, and again, I'll just fix my camera real quick. My apologies. One of the things that that Sri always says is that a poem should be read by the poet. They understand where the emphasis should go, the tone, the timing, etc. But we read it anyway. We read it cold, and it's a celebration of poetry. So thank you for indulging us. I want to make a few quick announcements before we bring Walter and Kaye back. Next week we'll be off for Thanksgiving. But after that, we'll be back with Clyde Haberman. Clyde Haberman is a Pulitzer Prize winning former columnist, editorial writer at the New York Times, with 13 years as a correspondent based in Tokyo, Rome, and Jerusalem. I remember reading Clyde Haberman when I was growing up, getting the Times every day. So it's a thrill to have him be our guest. Props to Carla Baranakis, one of our producers, for reaching out to him. Again, speaking of our team, another shout out to Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. You can follow them at Big Green Pen, at Steve DeReeve, at Julia L. Weeks, and at Kabara. Carla Baranakis is also responsible for putting out the Local Connection. It's from the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. It comes out every week and offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. Best of all, it's free. Subscribe at bit.ly/local connection. bit.ly/local news tips. bit.ly/local news tips. And I also want to give a shout out to our sponsor again, Muckrack. At 11 a.m. Eastern Time, our friends Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian will be hosting She's on Call, which is a great medical-related show that we helped produce. This week's episode focuses on family medicine with a hospitalist and endocrine surgery. So please make sure to join them at 11 a.m. Eastern Time for She's on Call, produced by Sri Srinivasan, but also Rose Horowitz, Vandana Menon, and Julia Weeks. It's a great show. You definitely should watch. With that, we're going to bring back Kaye and Walter for some final thoughts. Again, Walter Greason is a professor, a chair at the Department of History at Macalester College, and an interdisciplinary scholar, historian, urbanist, and economist. Kaye Whitehead is an Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker and award-winning radio host. She's director of the Karson Institute for Race, Peace, and Social Justice. And if you joined us late, you'll be able to watch the video almost right away on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, or our website. Wherever you're watching, you can go right back to the beginning to cover what you missed. Kaye, Walter, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Before we get into your final thoughts, just want to thank you again for joining us and taking the time to really walk through some important issues that we wanted our audience to hear. So first, Kaye, I'm going to give the floor to you to offer your final thoughts, and then Walter.
Thank you so much, Neil, for inviting me to the New York Times Read Along. Thank you, Walter. It's always a pleasure to be in conversation with you. I think that we are in a fight. It's been an ongoing fight since 1619, to use that as a marker for the heart and soul of this country, that people wonder if it's about policies, practices, laws, and procedures, and if the Kerner Commission, which is recently re-released with the new opening piece by Jelani Cobb, if the Kerner Commission is any indication, we're into the fourth perimeter here. We're talking about hearts and minds, and that's where the battleground is. I end by thinking about something Langston Hughes wrote, to just paraphrase one little small line of it, that America has never been America to me, but I swear America will be. We work to make America better, not for ourselves, not for our children. I think it's for the children of my children and for those children to come. That's why we do the hard work every day.
Thank you, Kaye. Walter, over to you.
Thank you so much. You two always are my favorite people. This is a blessing whenever I get to spend time with y'all. And so the community that we have here, you said a pro tip that we can share for writers. And so I think a lot about recently people talking about writing about your passion, writing from a place where you maybe might be afraid to put your words to paper. I think those things are really important. However, at the heart of it, it's not just passion. It's not just kind of the excitement of writing that I hope that people can tap into coming out of this, is that your voice, no matter what format it takes, it could be writing, it could be video, it could be podcasting, you've got to step up and share your perspective. And we all gain so much. We all learn and we grow when we do that. And at the heart of it, I really want everyone to look at your local library, your school library, your local college or university library. Defend the librarians, defend the archivists. These are the people who are guardians of our freedom, and they're under assault right now too. It's not just the school board, it's not just the principal or superintendent, it's not just the teacher in the classroom. Our libraries and our archivists need us to stand up for them so that all of our freedoms will remain intact.
Thank you, Walter. Well said. I want to share Ron Thomas, great show as usual. Thank you, Ron. And Patricia saying thanks again to Walter and Kaye, as well as the production team for a great show. Again, this is Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer and occasional guest host. It was an honor and a privilege to be able to host this episode with Walter and Kaye, addressing some of the most important issues of the day. With that, again, we encourage you to stay online, get another cup of coffee, take a little break, and then watch She's on Call at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Next week we'll be off, but the week after that, December 5th, we have Clyde Haberman, who is going to be our guest. Ellen Austin says, thanks. If we don't defend the weakest link, we all fail. Absolutely. Mary Curtis gives us a here for the librarians. Tagging Cynthia Graham Hurd, one of the Charleston 9, was a dedicated librarian. That's thank you, Mary, for pointing that out. Absolutely. So with that, we're going to bring this show to a close. I need to get organized here and then head on to the airport to pick up my mom for her week-long visit here for Thanksgiving. So hope you have a chance to have a safe Thanksgiving with friends and family. We really appreciate everyone staying with us. Laura Silverman, fantastic show. Liz Pressman sending us some hearts. Miriam Berkeley, so glad to have heard these wonderful guests, both of whom I am now following on Twitter. So I certainly encourage you, if you haven't already, certainly follow them on Twitter. And you can still tag your friends if you like, comment, share. Every time you like it, every time you comment, it gets it back in the newsfeed for people. So you can follow Walter at World Professor on Twitter, and Kaye is at Kaye Whitehead on Twitter. So thank you very much for your time. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.